Black mechanic fixes billionaire's car unaware it changes his life forever. The sound of shattering glass pierced the night air as James Wilson's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel of the sleek Bentley. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Blood trickled down his temple as he glanced in the rearview mirror at the unconscious billionaire slumped in the back seat. The flashing lights of police cars illuminated the rain-soaked road behind them. "Hold on, Mr. Harrington," James muttered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Just stay with me." The car swerved dangerously as a bullet shattered the side mirror. James, a 58-year-old mechanic who'd spent his life fixing cars, never imagined he'd be driving one in a high-speed chase with armed men in pursuit. The bridge ahead was their only escape route, but the barricade of police cars made it seem impossible. "We're not going to make it," he whispered, looking at the photo of his granddaughter that he'd taped to the dashboard just hours earlier. The weight of the small metal box hidden under the seat felt heavier than ever. Whatever secrets it contained had turned this routine repair job into a fight for survival. As the Bentley approached the blockade at 90 miles per hour, James made a decision that would change everything. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 12 hours earlier when James arrived at his small garage on the outskirts of Millfield, the same way he had for the past 30 years. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Wilson's auto repair. James Wilson wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better days and surveyed his modest kingdom. Vintage rock posters from the 70s adorned the walls, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, and Jimi Hendrix watching over the space like old friends. A transistor radio played Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On?", the sound occasionally disrupted by static. "Morning, Pop," called out Marcus, James's 32-year-old son, as he entered carrying 2 cups of coffee from the diner across the street. Marcus had his father's build, tall and solid, but with a modern edge. While James wore the same style of blue work shirt he'd worn since the Carter administration, Marcus sported tattoos that peeked out from under his rolled-up sleeves. "You're early," James remarked, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Thought you had that interview at the dealership in the city today." Marcus shrugged, sliding his toolbox across the concrete floor. "Rescheduled for next week. Figured I'd help out here instead. Mrs. Johnson's Buick's still giving you trouble." James nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "Transmission's shot. Told her it'd be cheaper to buy a new car, but she's sentimental about it. Her late husband bought it for their 40th anniversary." "Some things are worth more than money," Marcus replied, glancing at the faded photograph of his mother that hung near the register. She'd passed away from cancer 5 years ago, leaving a void that neither man knew how to fill. The bell above the door jingled, and both men turned to see Diane Lewis bustling in. At 62, Diane was the neighborhood's unofficial matriarch, running the community center with the same efficiency she'd once applied as a school principal before retirement. "James Wilson, do you ever check your phone?" she asked, her tone stern but her eyes warm. "I've been calling you all morning." James patted his pockets before locating his ancient flip phone. "Battery's dead again. What's wrong, Diane? The center's van acting up." "No, it's not about me," she said, lowering her voice. "It's about the community center. The bank's moving up the foreclosure date. We have until the end of the month to come up with the money, or they'll sell the building to some developer from New York." James frowned, setting down his coffee. The community center had been a safe haven for kids in their neighborhood for decades. During the worst years of gang violence in the 90s, it had been one of the few places parents could trust. "How much do we need?" Marcus asked. Diane sighed. "About 80,000. We've raised nearly 30 through donations, but—" She trailed off, the impossibility of the situation hanging in the air. James squeezed her shoulder gently. "We'll figure something out, Diane. We always do." The conversation was interrupted by the distinctive sound of an expensive engine purring outside. All three turned to look through the grimy windows as a sleek midnight blue Bentley Continental GT pulled up to the curb. "Well, I'll be damned," James muttered. "That's not our usual clientele." The car door opened, and out stepped a man in his early 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than James made in 3 months. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his posture spoke of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "That's Robert Harrington," Diane whispered, awe in her voice. "The tech billionaire. What's he doing in this neighborhood?" Before anyone could speculate further, the bell chimed again as Harrington entered the shop. Up close, his face showed signs of stress despite his composed demeanor. "I'm looking for James Wilson," he announced, his eyes scanning the modest garage. James stepped forward, wiping his hands again on the old rag. "That's me. What can I do for you, Mr. Harrington?" A flicker of surprise crossed Harrington's face. You know who I am? Your face has been on the cover of enough magazines, James replied. Plus, that car of yours isn't exactly inconspicuous around here. Harrington smiled slightly, though the tension didn't leave his shoulders. I need your help, Mr. Wilson. My car's been making an unusual noise, and I was told you're the best mechanic in the city for foreign imports. James raised an eyebrow. Who told you that? Gerald Washington. We serve on a nonprofit board together. He said you worked miracles on his vintage Jaguar when no one else could figure out what was wrong with it. James nodded, remembering the challenging repair from the previous year. That was a tricky one, but why bring your car here? Surely the dealership. I'd prefer discretion, Harrington interrupted, lowering his voice. And I'd prefer if you handled it personally. Money is no object. James exchanged glances with Marcus, who shrugged subtly. All right, let me take a look. Marcus, can you finish up Mrs. Johnson's Buick? As Marcus nodded and moved away, James followed Harrington outside to the Bentley. The billionaire handed him the keys, their fingers briefly touching during the exchange. James couldn't help but notice a slight tremor in the older man's hand. I have meetings all day, Harrington said, checking his Rolex. Can I leave it with you and return this evening? Sure, James replied. We close at 6, but I can stay late if needed. Harrington nodded, already typing on his phone. My assistant will arrange for a car to pick me up. I'll return around 7, and Mr. Wilson, he looked up, his eyes suddenly intense. Please don't let anyone else examine the vehicle. It's important. With that cryptic request, Harrington stepped back as a black SUV pulled up almost immediately. He climbed in without another word, leaving James standing on the sidewalk with the Bentley's keys in his hand. Well, that was weird, Marcus said, joining his father outside. James nodded slowly. Yeah, something's not right there. Diane appeared at the door of the shop. James, I should get going. Board meeting at the center in 20 minutes. Let me know if you think of anything for our situation. As she left, Marcus nudged his father. So what do you think is really going on with Billionaire Boy and his fancy car? James shook his head. I don't know, but I intend to find out. He opened the driver's door of the Bentley and slid inside, immediately noticing something unusual. Despite Harrington's claim about a noise, the engine sounded perfect when James started it. Too perfect. Marcus, finish up with Mrs. Johnson's car. I'm going to move this into the back bay and take a closer look. As James drove the luxury vehicle into the garage, he couldn't shake the feeling that Robert Harrington wasn't being entirely truthful about why he'd brought his car to Wilson's auto repair. And James had been around long enough to know that when rich people lied, there was usually a very good reason. By noon, James had methodically examined the Bentley's engine, suspension, and exhaust system. Everything was in pristine condition with no sign of any mechanical issues. He wiped sweat from his brow and stood back, puzzled. Find anything? Marcus asked, bringing over sandwiches from the diner. James shook his head. Nothing. This car runs better than anything I've seen in years. He unwrapped his sandwich and took a bite, still studying the vehicle. Either Harrington's hearing things or there's something else going on. Marcus leaned against the workbench. Maybe he's paranoid. Those tech guys are always worried about corporate espionage and stuff. Maybe, James conceded, but he wasn't convinced. His intuition, honed by decades of solving mechanical mysteries, told him there was more to this story. After lunch, James decided to check the undercarriage more thoroughly. He lay on a creeper and rolled beneath the Bentley, shining his flashlight along the smooth metal. Everything looked normal until the beam caught something unusual near the rear axle, a small compartment that didn't match the car's design. Marcus, hand me the small screwdriver set, James called out. With careful movements, James removed the panel covering the hidden compartment. Inside was a metal box about the size of a paperback book, secured with a combination lock. It definitely wasn't a factory-installed feature. James slid out from under the car, the box in his hands. Found this hidden underneath, secret compartment. Marcus whistled low. That's not standard equipment. What do you think is inside? Not our business, James replied firmly, though curiosity gnawed at him. Whatever Harrington's involved in, I don't want any part of it. But Pop, what if it's something illegal, drugs, stolen data? James shook his head. That's for him to explain when he comes back. In the meantime, I'm putting this in the safe and finishing the inspection. Actual car repair is still our job. As James locked the metal box in the old safe in his office, the phone rang. Marcus answered it, then called out, Pop, it's Diane. Sounds urgent. James took the phone, hearing immediate distress in Diane's voice. James, we've got trouble at the center. Some men showed up claiming to represent the bank. They're threatening to change the locks today instead of waiting for the end of the month. I think they're trying to intimidate us into leaving immediately. That's not legal, James said, anger rising. They can't do that before the foreclosure date. I know that and you know that, but they don't seem to care. There are kids here for the after-school program. I don't want them scared. James checked his watch. It was 3:30 p.m. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Call Officer Rivera too. He'll back us up. After hanging up, James explained the situation to Marcus. I need to help Diane. Can you handle things here until I get back? Marcus nodded. Go. I'll finish Mrs. Johnson's car and keep an eye on the mysterious Bentley. James grabbed his jacket and keys. Remember, don't let anyone touch that car, and don't mention the box to anyone. As James drove his old Ford pickup to the community center, his mind was split between worry for Diane and curiosity about Robert Harrington's secret compartment. The two situations seemed worlds apart, the struggles of his community versus the mysterious affairs of the ultra-wealthy. Yet somehow, they'd both landed in his lap on the same day. The community center was housed in an old brick building that had once been a library. Its worn steps and faded sign belied the vital role it played in the neighborhood. As James pulled up, he immediately spotted two men in expensive suits standing on the steps, while Diane blocked the entrance with her arms crossed defiantly. These men claim they have authorization to take possession today, Diane explained as James approached. Her voice was steady, but he could see the worry in her eyes. Ma'am, we've been more than patient, one of the men said, his tone condescending. The bank has authorized immediate repossession due to concerns about the property's condition. James stepped between them and Diane. The foreclosure notice clearly states the end of the month. Unless you've got a court order changing that, you need to leave. The taller of the two men smirked. And you are? James Wilson, board member and concerned citizen, and if you try to change these locks, I'll have Officer Rivera here arrest you for trespassing and harassment. As if on cue, a police cruiser pulled up, and Officer Miguel Rivera stepped out. At 45, Rivera had been patrolling the neighborhood for over 2 decades and knew everyone by name. Everything okay here? Rivera asked, his hand resting casually on his belt. The two men exchanged glances, their confidence visibly diminishing. We'll be in touch with the bank's legal department, the shorter one said, handing Diane a business card. This matter isn't closed. As they retreated to their luxury sedan, Diane let out a breath. Thank you both. I was worried they might actually try something. Officer Rivera shook his head. They're pushing their luck. The foreclosure process has specific legal requirements, but Diane, they're getting more aggressive. That's not a good sign. James nodded grimly. They want this property badly. The question is, why the rush? This area hasn't exactly been prime real estate. There are rumors, Rivera said, lowering his voice. Word is that the city's planning a major redevelopment project for this whole section. New transit hub, luxury condos, the works. Nothing official yet, but if someone had inside information. They could buy up property cheap before prices skyrocket, James finished, the pieces clicking into place. Diane, we need to buy more time. Is there any way to extend the deadline with the bank? Diane shook her head. Not without at least half the money. I've tried everything, James, called in every favor, applied for every grant. Unless we get a miracle in the next 2 weeks, this place is gone. Inside the center, children's laughter echoed from the main room where the after-school program was in full swing. James watched through the doorway as kids from the neighborhood worked on homework, played board games, and practiced on the old upright piano in the corner. For many, this was the only safe place they had between school and home. I'll figure something out, James promised, though he had no idea what that might be. For now, call me if those men show up again. As he drove back to the garage, James couldn't help drawing parallels between the center's plight and his own business struggles. Wilson's auto repair had been his father's before him, and the neighborhood had changed dramatically over the decades. What had once been a thriving working-class area was now caught between neglect and gentrification, with long-time residents fighting to hold onto their homes and businesses. Lost in thought, James almost missed the black SUV parked across from his garage. As he pulled into the lot, he noticed 2 men sitting inside, watching the entrance. They didn't look like typical customers, and something about their rigid posture set off warning bells in James's mind. Inside the garage, Marcus was finishing up Mrs. Johnson's Buick. Everything okay at the center? He asked as James entered. For now, James replied, glancing back at the street. Did anyone come by while I was gone? Just Mrs. Johnson to pick up her car. Oh, and someone called asking for Harrington. Didn't leave a name, hung up when I said he wasn't here. James frowned. There's an SUV outside that's been sitting there too long, 2 men watching the place. Marcus moved to the window, careful to stay partially hidden behind a cabinet. Think it has something to do with Harrington's car. Maybe. Let me check something. James went to his office and opened the safe, confirming the metal box was still there. As he turned to leave, his phone rang an unknown number. "Wilson's Auto Repair," he answered cautiously. "Mr. Wilson." Robert Harrington's voice was tense. "Has anyone come looking for my car?" "No, but there's an SUV watching the garage, and someone called asking for you." There was a pause before Harrington spoke again. "Listen carefully. I'm sending someone trustworthy to pick up the car immediately. His name is Samuel Green. Older gentleman, glasses, drives a blue Tesla. Give him the keys, no questions asked." "Mr. Harrington, I found something hidden under your car. A metal box in a secret compartment. You want to tell me what that's about?" Another longer pause. "You weren't supposed to find that," Harrington finally said, his voice barely audible. "It's complicated, Mr. Wilson." "Complicated enough to put me and my son in danger?" James demanded, anger rising. "There are men watching my business right now." "I'm sorry. I never intended." Harrington's voice cut off, replaced by the sound of a commotion in the background. When he spoke again, his words came in a rushed whisper. "Don't give the car to anyone. I'll come myself, and whatever you do, keep that box safe. Lives depend on it." The line went dead, leaving James staring at his phone in disbelief. What had seemed like an odd but straightforward interaction with an eccentric billionaire was rapidly evolving into something far more dangerous. James returned to the main area of the garage, where Marcus was still watching the SUV. "Something's definitely wrong," James told his son, keeping his voice low. "Harrington sounds like he's in trouble, said not to give the car to anyone but him." "What about the box?" Marcus asked. "He knows about it, says lives depend on keeping it safe." James ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of the situation. "Marcus, I want you to leave. Take the back exit, get your car from the side lot, and go to Diane's. Stay there until I call you." Marcus shook his head firmly. "No way, Pop, I'm not leaving you here alone." "This isn't a discussion," James said, using the authoritative tone that had worked when Marcus was younger. "If this turns bad, at least one of us needs to be safe." Before Marcus could argue further, the sound of breaking glass shattered the tense quiet. A brick lay on the floor amid the glittering shards from the front window. "Get down!" James shouted, pulling Marcus behind the heavy metal workbench as the front door burst open. Two men in dark clothing entered, their faces partially obscured by baseball caps. One held what looked like a gun at his side. "Where's Harrington's car?" the taller one demanded, scanning the garage. James and Marcus remained silent, crouched behind the workbench. James's mind raced, calculating distances to potential weapons, the wrench on the floor 5 feet away, the fire extinguisher on the wall. "We know it's here," the second man called out. "Make this easy on yourselves." James whispered to Marcus, "When I move, run for the back door, don't look back." Marcus gripped his father's arm. "Pop, don't." Before he could finish, James grabbed a heavy socket wrench and threw it across the garage, where it crashed into a stack of oil cans with a loud clatter. As the intruders turned toward the noise, James shoved Marcus toward the rear of the shop. "There!" one of the men shouted, spotting them. James grabbed the fire extinguisher and discharged it, filling the air with white chemical fog. Through the chaos, he heard Marcus reach the back door. "Find the car!" one intruder yelled to the other. James moved through the fog toward his office, intent on securing the metal box. If these men were willing to break in so boldly, the contents must be incredibly valuable or dangerous. He reached the office and closed the door, quickly retrieving the box from the safe. There was no time to examine it further. He needed to get out before the intruders found him. A crash from the garage told him they'd located the Bentley in the rear bay. James slipped the metal box into his jacket pocket and peered out of the office door. Through the settling extinguisher fog, he could see one man searching the luxury car while the other kept watch. James's gaze fell on the Bentley's keys, which he'd left on his desk. Making a split-second decision, he grabbed them and his phone, then quietly moved along the wall toward the side exit. He was almost there when a floorboard creaked beneath his foot. "He's over there!" one of the men shouted. James abandoned stealth and ran for the exit, bursting through the door into the fading afternoon light. Behind him, he heard the men in pursuit. The side lot was empty. Marcus had gotten away safely. James ran toward his pickup truck, but movement near the street told him the men from the SUV were now involved, cutting off his escape route. With no other option, James turned and ran back toward the garage, circling around to the rear bay where the Bentley was parked. The loading door was still open from when they'd brought Mrs. Johnson's car out earlier. In a desperate gamble, James slid into the driver's seat of the Bentley, inserted the key, and fired up the engine. The powerful car responded instantly, surging forward as James stomped on the accelerator. He steered through the open bay door, narrowly missing one of the intruders who dove out of the way. The Bentley fishtailed onto the street, tires squealing as James fought to control the unfamiliar vehicle. In the rearview mirror, he saw the men scrambling toward their SUV. James had never driven anything like the Bentley before, but desperation made him a quick study. He navigated through the familiar streets of his neighborhood, trying to put distance between himself and his pursuers while figuring out his next move. His phone rang. Marcus. "Pop, where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," James assured him, taking a sharp turn that made the Bentley's tires protest. "Got away in Harrington's car." "Those men after me?" "Yes, black SUV about 3 blocks behind you. I'm following them in my car. What's the plan?" James checked his mirrors, spotting the SUV gaining ground. "I need to find Harrington. He's the only one who can explain what this is all about." "His company headquarters is downtown," Marcus suggested. 20 minutes in normal traffic." "I don't have 20 minutes, James replied, watching the SUV draw closer. "And I can't lead these guys there anyway. I need somewhere safe to think." An idea struck him. "Marcus, call Diane, tell her to meet me at the old West Side Bridge in 15 minutes, and call Officer Rivera too." "The abandoned bridge? Pop, what are you planning?" "Just make the calls," James insisted, ending the conversation as he needed both hands to navigate a particularly tight turn. The Bentley responded beautifully, its power and handling unlike anything James had experienced in his decades of working on cars. Under different circumstances, he might have enjoyed the drive. Now he was simply grateful for the vehicle's capabilities as he maneuvered through increasingly complex routes, trying to shake his pursuers. As he drove, the weight of the metal box in his pocket reminded him of the stakes. Whatever it contained had driven these men to violence, and somehow Robert Harrington, one of the wealthiest men in the country, was caught in the middle of it. James's phone rang again. This time, it was Harrington himself. "Wilson, where are you?" The billionaire sounded frantic. "In your car, being chased by some very determined men," James replied tersely. "Want to tell me what's going on now?" "Are you hurt? Is the box safe?" Harrington asked, ignoring James's question. "For now, but I need answers, Harrington. Why are these people after your car? What's in this box?" There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Evidence. Corporate corruption, bribery of government officials, money laundering, all linked to Viewpoint Technologies." James recognized the name. Viewpoint was one of the largest tech companies in the world, Harrington's chief competitor. "And you have proof? Everything's on an encrypted drive in that box. Names, dates, account numbers, enough to bring down half the board of Viewpoint and several high-ranking politicians. I was gathering it for a federal investigation." "Why hide it in your car? Why bring it to my garage?" "I discovered someone in my organization was compromised. I couldn't trust my usual security team. I needed the evidence somewhere unexpected while I figured out who the mole was. Gerald Washington suggested your shop, said you were honest and kept to yourself. I never imagined they'd track it there so quickly." James checked his mirrors again. The SUV was still behind him, joined now by a second vehicle. "Well, they did. And now I'm in the middle of a high-speed chase with corporate spies." "Where are you heading?" Harrington asked. "West Side Bridge. It's abandoned, not many access points. I'm meeting a friend there who's a cop." "I'll be there," Harrington promised. 20 minutes tops. Just keep that evidence safe until then." As James approached the old bridge, rain began to fall, light at first but quickly intensifying into a downpour that reduced visibility. The West Side Bridge had been closed to traffic for years, awaiting demolition after a newer span had been built nearby. Its isolated location made it perfect for James's purposes. Limited access meant fewer ways for his pursuers to corner him. He drove onto the bridge, the Bentley's headlights cutting through the rain and darkness. Halfway across, he stopped and turned off the engine, listening to the rain drum on the roof while watching his mirrors for approaching vehicles. His phone lit up with a text from Marcus. "Officer Rivera on his way, 10 men out, Diane meeting him there." James felt a wave of gratitude for his son's reliability. Now he just needed to hold this position until help arrived. He took out the metal box, examining it more closely in the dim light. The combination lock had 4 digits, impossible to guess without knowing the code. Headlights appeared at the entrance to the bridge. James tensed but relaxed slightly when he recognized Diane's sensible sedan rather than the pursuer's SUV. She parked behind the Bentley and hurried through the rain to his window. "James Wilson, what kind of trouble have you gotten yourself into?" she demanded as he lowered the window. Despite her stern tone, concern was evident in her eyes. "The kind I didn't ask for," he replied, showing her the metal box. "Corporate espionage, apparently. Harrington's on his way, and so is Rivera." Diane shook her head in disbelief. "Only you could turn a simple car repair into an action movie." She glanced nervously behind them. "Those men still after you? Last I saw, get in, you're getting soaked." She hurried around to the passenger side and slid into the luxurious interior. "Fancy," she remarked, looking around the Bentley's cabin. "What's the plan once everyone gets here?" "Harrington takes his car and his evidence, explains everything to Rivera, and I go home and pretend this never happened," James said firmly. "I'm a mechanic, not a spy." Diane smiled slightly. "You'd make a terrible spy anyway, too honest." Their conversation was interrupted by more headlights approaching the bridge, 2 sets this time. James tensed, unable to identify the vehicles through the heavy rain. "That's not Marcus or Rivera," he said, starting the Bentley's engine. "We need to move." Before he could put the car in gear, the approaching vehicle stopped, blocking the bridge entrance. 4 men emerged, barely visible as silhouettes in the rain and darkness. "James," Diane whispered urgently, "what's in that box that's worth all this?" "Evidence of corruption, big names involved." James's mind raced, calculating options. The bridge had only 2 access points, the main entrance now blocked by the pursuers and a maintenance road that connected to the opposite end. If they could reach that. The sound of a car door slamming echoed through the rain. One of the silhouettes approached, holding what was unmistakably a gun. "Drive," Diane urged. James shifted into reverse, the Bentley's tires spinning slightly on the wet surface before finding purchase. He backed up rapidly, swinging the car around to face the opposite direction. The pursuing vehicles were already moving to follow. "Hang on," James warned, flooring the accelerator. The Bentley shot forward, racing toward the far end of the bridge. In his mirrors, he could see the other cars in pursuit, gaining ground on the slick surface. They were halfway to the exit when headlights appeared ahead. Someone was approaching from the maintenance road. James's heart sank. They were trapped between pursuers on both sides. "What now?" Diane asked, her voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. James slowed the Bentley, eyes darting between the vehicles closing in from both directions. "I don't know." The approaching car from the maintenance road flashed its lights twice, then 3 times a signal. James's phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Harrington. Keep driving." Relief flooded through James as he recognized the coded message. "It's Harrington ahead of us, but we've still got company behind." As they neared the end of the bridge, the vehicle ahead, a sleek Tesla, swerved to create an opening. James aimed the Bentley for the gap, preparing to thread the needle between Harrington's car and the bridge railing. That's when the first shot rang out, shattering the Bentley's rear window. Diane screamed as James instinctively ducked, fighting to maintain control of the vehicle. "Stay down," he shouted, pushing her head below the dashboard. A second shot hit the side mirror. James swerved, trying to make them a harder target while still aiming for the narrow escape route ahead. The rain and darkness were both hindrance and help, reducing visibility, but also making accurate shooting more difficult for their pursuers. They were almost at the gap when disaster struck. A third shot hit the Bentley's rear tire, sending the car into a spin. James fought the wheel, trying to regain control as they slid across the wet bridge surface. The Bentley slammed into the bridge railing with a sickening crunch of metal. The impact deployed the airbags, momentarily stunning James. When his vision cleared, he saw that the luxury car was precariously balanced, its front end hanging partially over the edge of the bridge. "Diane," he called out urgently, "are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she responded, her voice shaky but strong. "Just bruised." Behind them, the pursuers' vehicles had stopped. Doors opened and closed as men approached cautiously, weapons drawn. Ahead, James could see Robert Harrington emerging from the Tesla, his face a mask of concern. "We need to get out," James said, reaching for his door handle, but the door was jammed, warped from the impact with the railing. The passenger side was similarly compromised. They were trapped in the teetering vehicle. One of the approaching men called out, "Give us the box and no one gets hurt." James looked at Diane, then at the metal box that had caused all this chaos. "I'm sorry I got you into this," she smiled grimly. "You always did have a talent for excitement, James Wilson." Movement caught James's eye. Harrington was cautiously making his way toward them, using the bridge's support structure for cover. And in the distance, the welcome sound of police sirens grew louder. "Just a few more minutes," James murmured. "Help is coming." The sound of shattering glass pierced the night air as one of the pursuers smashed the Bentley's back window with the butt of his gun. James's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Blood trickled down his temple from where the airbag had struck him. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Robert Harrington, who had been knocked unconscious during the crash and was now slumped in the back seat, having climbed in through the broken window just before the pursuers reached them. The flashing lights of police cars illuminated the rain-soaked road behind them. The bridge was now surrounded, but the armed men seemed undeterred, determined to get what they came for. "Hold on, Mr. Harrington," James muttered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Just stay with me." Car swerved dangerously as a bullet shattered the side mirror. James, a 58-year-old mechanic who'd spent his life fixing cars, never imagined he'd be in a luxury vehicle teetering on the edge of a bridge, an unconscious billionaire in the back seat, and armed corporate spies closing in. "We're not going to make it," he whispered, looking at the photo of his granddaughter that he'd taped to the dashboard just hours earlier. The weight of the small metal box hidden under the seat felt heavier than ever. As the pursuers approached within feet of the car, James made a decision that would change everything. He jammed the Bentley into reverse, the powerful engine roaring to life. The sudden movement caused the car to slip further over the edge, hanging now at a precarious angle. "James, what are you doing?" Diane gasped, gripping the armrest. "Creating a distraction," he replied, reaching beneath the seat for the metal box. The approaching men hesitated, seeing the car's dangerous position. Behind them, Officer Rivera's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Police, drop your weapons!" In the chaotic moments that followed, several things happened at once. The pursuers turned toward the police, some raising their hands while others fled toward their vehicles. Robert Harrington regained consciousness in the back seat, groaning as he touched a hand to his bloodied forehead. And James, seizing the moment of confusion, passed the metal box to Diane. "Get to Rivera," he whispered urgently. "Now." Understanding immediately, Diane pushed open her door, which had been jarred loose by their movement. She slipped out of the car just as one of the fleeing men noticed and shouted in alarm. "Stop her!" But it was too late. Diane moved with surprising speed for her age, ducking behind the bridge's support beams as she made her way toward the police line. A shot rang out, missing her by inches as Officer Rivera and his colleagues returned fire, providing cover. Inside the Bentley, James turned to Harrington. "Can you move? We need to get out before this car goes over." Harrington nodded weakly. "The evidence? Safe with Diane. She's getting it to the police." Relief washed over the billionaire's face. "Thank you. You don't know how many lives that will save." A shout from outside drew their attention. The remaining pursuers were being taken into custody, their weapons confiscated. Diane had reached the police line safely, the metal box clutched in her hands. "Let's get you out of here," James said, helping Harrington toward the broken rear window. The car shifted ominously as they moved, metal groaning against the damaged railing. Officer Rivera and another policeman approached cautiously, hands extended to help. "Careful, James, that railing won't hold much longer." With their assistance, Harrington made it safely out of the vehicle. As James prepared to follow, he glanced back at the interior of the Bentley, the luxury car that had unexpectedly become central to this extraordinary day. His gaze fell on his granddaughter's photo, still attached to the dashboard. He reached for it just as the railing gave way with a horrific screech of metal. The car lurched forward, beginning its descent toward the water below. "James!" Multiple voices shouted in unison. A desperate move, James lunged for the broken window, his upper body clearing the frame as the car tilted further. Strong hands grabbed his arms, Rivera and another officer pulling with all their might. For a terrifying moment, he was suspended between the falling car and the bridge, his legs still inside the vehicle as it pulled him down. With one final, powerful heave, the officers yanked him free just as the Bentley broke away completely, plummeting into the dark water below with a distant splash. James lay on the wet bridge surface, breathing heavily, the photo of his granddaughter clutched in his trembling hand. Around him, the scene was one of controlled chaos, officers securing the area and the suspects, paramedics attending to Harrington, and Diane rushing to James's side. "You impossible man," she scolded, kneeling beside him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Always cutting it too close." James managed a weak smile. "Guess I'll need to find another line of work. My garage is probably a mess." "I think you might have other options soon," she replied, nodding toward Harrington, who was now sitting up, speaking intently with federal agents who had just arrived on the scene. As the rain began to ease, Marcus's car pulled up to the police barricade. He jumped out, rushing to his father as soon as the officers let him through. "Pop!" he called, dropping to his knees beside James. "Are you okay? What happened?" James sat up slowly, wincing at the various aches making themselves known. "It's a long story, son. One I'm still trying to believe myself." 3 hours later, James sat in a private room at Millfield General Hospital, a bandage on his temple and a cup of lukewarm coffee in his hands. The doctors had insisted on keeping him for observation, despite his protests that he was fine. The door opened, and Robert Harrington entered, looking remarkably composed for someone who had also been in the crash. His suit was replaced with hospital-issued scrubs, but his demeanor remained that of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. "Mr. Wilson," he said, pulling up a chair, I owe you an explanation and an apology, James nodded. Both would be appreciated. Harrington sighed deeply. For the past year, I've been working with federal investigators to gather evidence against Viewpoint Technologies. Their CEO, Richard Mercer, has been using the company as a front for bribing government officials to secure contracts, laundering money for criminal organizations, and stealing intellectual property. And you had proof in that box, James surmised. Yes, names, dates, account numbers, everything needed to bring down their entire operation. I was supposed to hand it over yesterday, but I discovered my head of security was compromised. I needed somewhere safe to keep it until I could identify who else might be working for Mercer. So you brought it to my garage, James said, understanding dawning. A place no one would think to look, Harrington nodded. Gerald Washington spoke highly of you, said you were honest and discreet. I never imagined Mercer's people would track it there so quickly. I put you and your son in terrible danger, and for that I am truly sorry. James studied the billionaire's face, seeing genuine remorse there. What happens now? The FBI has the evidence. Arrests are already being made. Mercer and several board members were taken into custody an hour ago, along with 2 senators and a federal judge. Harrington leaned forward. Your actions today helped expose corruption at the highest levels, Mr. Wilson. You saved lives. James shook his head slightly. I was just trying to protect my son and my friend. The garage, though. He trailed off, thinking of the damage the intruders had caused. About that, Harrington said, a small smile playing at his lips. I've taken the liberty of arranging for full repairs and upgrades to Wilson's Auto Repair. Consider it a small token of my gratitude. Before James could respond, there was a knock at the door. Diane entered, followed by Marcus and Officer Rivera. The doctor says you can leave tomorrow morning, Diane informed him, settling into a chair beside the bed. Though you'll have to take it easy for a few days, Marcus grinned. Which means I'll be running the garage. Hope you're okay with that, Pop. Speaking of the garage, Rivera interjected, the FBI's finished processing the scene. It's a mess, but structurally sound. James nodded, relieved that his business could be salvaged. Thank you all for being there today. I couldn't have made it through without you. Harrington cleared his throat. There's something else, Mr. Wilson. In light of today's events, I'd like to make a contribution to your community center. I understand it's facing foreclosure. Diane straightened in her chair. That's kind, Mr. Harrington, but $100,000, Harrington continued. No strings attached. Consider it an investment in the neighborhood that produced someone with your integrity, Mr. Wilson. The room fell silent as the enormity of the offer sank in. It was more than enough to save the center with funds left over for much-needed renovations. Why? James asked simply. Harrington's expression turned reflective. Today reminded me of something I'd forgotten in the corporate world, the value of community, of people who stand by each other even in the face of danger. He looked around the room at each of them. What you all did today wasn't for money or power. It was for each other. That's worth supporting. 2 weeks later, James stood in the newly reopened Wilson's Auto Repair, surveying the improvements. The garage had been fully restored, with new equipment that would have taken him years to afford on his own. Marcus was already putting it to good use, working on a classic Mustang with newfound confidence. The bell above the door jingled, and Diane entered, waving a newspaper. Have you seen this? She asked, spreading it on the counter. The headline read, Tech Giant Viewpoint TCHNOLOGIS EXCCUTIVES INDICTED in Massive Corruption Scandal. James skimmed the article, noting that Robert Harrington was credited with providing key evidence. There was no mention of a mechanic, a community center director, or a brave police officer, exactly as they had all agreed. The center looks amazing, by the way, he said, handing back the paper. Harrington's donation had not only saved the building from foreclosure but funded substantial improvements. The after-school program had already expanded to accommodate more children. Kids are calling it the Phoenix now, risen from the ashes, Diane said with a smile. And speaking of rising, have you given any thought to Harrington's other offer? James nodded slowly. The billionaire had been impressed by James's mechanical intuition and problem-solving skills. He'd offered him a position as head of vehicle development for a new electric car division he was creating, a role that would utilize James's decades of experience while providing financial security he'd never dreamed possible. I'm still thinking about it, he admitted. It's a big change. The bell jingled again as Marcus entered from the garage bay, wiping his hands on a rag, a gesture so like his father's that Diane smiled. What's a big change? Marcus asked. James hesitated, then decided it was time to share his thoughts. If I took Harrington's job offer, I was thinking you might want to take over the garage, make it yours. Marcus stared at his father, surprise evident on his face. You serious, Pop? You trust me with the family business. You've earned it, James said simply. You're ready. The younger Wilson looked around the garage, eyes taking in the legacy that stretched back to his grandfather. I'd keep the name Wilson's Auto Repair, and maybe add and custom work branch out a bit. James nodded, pride swelling in his chest. I think that sounds perfect. As they discussed the possibilities, a sleek Tesla pulled up outside. Robert Harrington stepped out, looking much more relaxed than when they'd first met him. Good morning, he greeted them as he entered. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, James replied, just discussing the future. Harrington smiled. That's actually why I'm here. I have some papers for you to look over, James. No pressure, of course. The position is yours whenever you're ready. He placed a folder on the counter. And I brought something else. From his pocket, he withdrew a small object and handed it to James. It was a key, modern, electronic, with a familiar luxury car logo. Your Bentley replacement came in, Harrington explained. I thought you might want to take it for a test drive. No secret compartments this time, I promise. James turned the key over in his hand, remembering the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a simple car repair. His life had changed in ways he never could have imagined, opening doors not just for him, but for his son, for Diane and the community center, and for the neighborhood he'd called home his entire life. I think I will, he said, closing his fingers around the key. But this time, let's keep the driving a little less exciting. As the group laughed, James reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. A black mechanic fixing a billionaire's car, unaware it would change his life forever. The title could have been the opening line of a story no one would believe, except that he had lived it. And now, standing in his rebuilt garage with his son, his friend, and an unlikely ally, he was ready to see where the road would lead next. She called, breaking free from her parents to run to James. He scooped her up in a hug, marveling at how much she'd grown in just a few months. Ready for the big ceremony? He asked as Marcus and Lisa joined them. Marcus nodded. Anne's been planning this for weeks. I think half the city's coming. Indeed, the crowd gathering outside the center was impressive. Neighborhood residents, city officials, reporters, and at the center of it all, Diane, resplendent in a vibrant blue dress, directing volunteers with the precision of a symphony conductor. James, there you are, she called, waving him over. Robert just called. He's running a few minutes late, traffic on the expressway. James nodded, unsurprised that Harrington was attending. Despite his busy schedule running one of the world's largest tech companies, he had maintained connections with the community that had played such a pivotal role in the Viewpoint case. His philanthropy had expanded beyond the initial donation to include college scholarships for neighborhood students and startup funding for local businesses. As they waited for the ceremony to begin, James found a quiet moment with Marcus. How's the Garcia project coming along? He asked, referring to a vintage Corvette restoration his son had taken on. Finished it yesterday, Marcus replied with justifiable pride. Mr. Garcia nearly cried when he saw it, said it looked better than when he bought it new in '67. James smiled. Your grandfather would be proud. He loved working on those old Corvettes. A thoughtful expression crossed Marcus's face. Sometimes I wonder what he would think of all this, you working for Harrington, me running the garage, everything that's happened. He'd say we were lucky, James replied. Lucky to have choices he never had. The arrival of Harrington's car, a modest hybrid rather than the flashy Bentley, signaled it was time for the ceremony to begin. The tech billionaire greeted James and Marcus warmly before joining Diane and the mayor on the temporary stage erected in front of the center. As Diane stepped to the microphone to welcome everyone, James found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. A routine car repair had cascaded into a series of decisions and actions that transformed not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The ceremony proceeded with speeches from the mayor, Harrington, and finally Diane, who invited James to join her at the podium. None of this would have been possible without James Wilson, she said, her voice carrying across the attentive crowd. Not just because he helped secure our funding, but because he embodies the spirit of this community, hardworking, honest, and always ready to help a neighbor in need. James, uncomfortable with public speaking, kept his remarks brief. This center has been the heart of our neighborhood for decades. It gave many of us a safe place to grow up, including my son. Now it will do the same for my granddaughter and kids like her. That's what community is all about, building something that lasts beyond ourselves. After the ribbon cutting, as attendees filtered into the center for refreshments and tour, Harrington pulled James aside. I have some news, the billionaire said, his expression serious. The last of the Viewpoint conspirators was indicted this morning. Richard Mercer is facing multiple life sentences. James nodded, feeling a sense of closure. Good. Justice served. Thanks to you, Harrington reminded him. If you hadn't found that hidden compartment, if you hadn't protected the evidence. He let the implications hang in the air. Just did what anyone would do, James replied, uncomfortable with the praise. Harrington smiled. That's where you're wrong, James. What you did, what Diane did, what Marcus and Officer Rivera did, it wasn't what anyone would do. It was extraordinary, and it's changed more lives than you'll ever know. As the celebration continued around them, James watched his granddaughter playing with other children in the new recreation area. The center that had been so close to disappearing was now vibrant with life and possibility. His son's business was thriving, and James himself had found a new chapter in life when he least expected it. A black mechanic fixing a billionaire's car, unaware it would change his life forever. The story had seemed implausible at the start. Yet here they were, lives intertwined by chance, choice, and courage, creating ripples that would continue long after that rainy night on the bridge. Ready for the test drive next week? Harrington asked, changing the subject to their upcoming evaluation of a new electric SUV prototype. The team's eager for your input on the suspension system. James smiled, thinking of how far he'd come from the man who had opened his garage that morning 6 months ago. Wouldn't miss it. But this time, let's keep the excitement to a minimum. As evening fell and the celebration wound down, James found himself alone in the center's new workshop, a space dedicated to teaching young people the skills he'd spent a lifetime perfecting. The tools were shiny and new, the workbenches unmarked by use. Soon they would be worn with the efforts of the next generation of builders and fixers. He ran his hand along a workbench, feeling the smooth surface beneath his fingers. From the doorway, Diane watched him with understanding in her eyes. "Full circle, isn't it?" she said softly. "From learning in a place like this to building one for others." James nodded, words unnecessary between old friends who had witnessed each other's journeys for decades. Outside, Marcus waited with Lisa and Amara, ready to drive back to the house they'd recently purchased just blocks from both the garage and the community center. The neighborhood was changing, new businesses opening, houses being renovated rather than demolished, but the core remained the same. People who looked out for each other, who built something together that was stronger than any individual could create alone. As James joined his family, Amara reached for his hand. "Grandpa, can we fix my bike tomorrow? The chain keeps coming off." "Of course we can, sweetheart," he promised, squeezing her small hand in his. "That's what Wilsons do. We fix things." It was the simplest truth he knew, and in the end, the most profound. Whether it was cars or communities, relationships or wrongs, the act of repair was sacred work. It had defined his past, transformed his present, and now illuminated his future. A future he never could have imagined on that ordinary morning when a midnight blue Bentley pulled up outside his garage, carrying both danger and possibility in its hidden compartment. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.